it well. Played it very, very, very well indeed.
No more slices for you.
Oh, look at that for judgment.
You'll learn.
Hello, welcome to Slice. This is our third major championship special because it's the third men's major of the year and we started in January. So if you are a first-time listener, please subscribe, please rate, please review, all these things. They make a huge difference to Sam and I, particularly on a Monday, Sam, where I am sleep deprived, I have a cold, and my record isn't quite as good as it could have been. How are you, more importantly?
I'm all right. I mean, actually, for once, slept okay because I made a decision to not watch the playoff last night, the Canadian Open, which is unlike me, to be honest. Normally, I'm there to the bitter end, but I thought, you know what? I could really use a decent night's sleep, having been out till 2 a.m. the previous night. You know, it was turned into one of those nights.
Another meeting about the football team, was it?
This one wasn't. This was just a celebration of a friend's birthday, and it sort of escalated. Ended up with a kebab on the way home. I'm not
one
proud
of those.
Of it. But,
you're too old for that, Sam. You're too old for it. But no, keep going. Speaking of people being too old for stuff, as a bald man, I am a cap wearer. Don't get me wrong. I love a cap. Love a dad hat. I have a range of them that rarely leave my head. But there was one little story I forgot to share from my trip to France last week, if you'll indulge me. And that is there was a lovely, charming owner of a creperie, the oldest creperie in Le Touquet, who had his hat on backwards, which for me, there's a line I won't cross, and it's the backwards hat. But, each their own. I think you've got a bit of hair. It maybe looks a bit better.
Marcel Syme can pull it off, so,
Well, yeah, I look like Brian off of E17, so it's no good for me. So this charming man with his backwards hat asked us where we were playing golf the next day. We told him. He's really, really, really nice. And then as I walked out of the cafe and shut the door and said my au revoirs, I noticed, Sam, that this was a 4 Aces hat he was wearing.
Wow.
Yeah, they are out there. You can find them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You didn't engage him in conversation about Patrick Reed's season, or?
No, I didn't go back to challenge his views on anything. I left the creperie, never to return. But yeah, 4 Aces hat. Can you believe it? Quatre Aces or whatever. Oops, Freudian.
Wow, that's a surprising one. I must admit, I don't think I've seen many live hats in the wild. At least, you see them on TV occasionally, but not whilst attending golf events. But at the time, maybe I'm just not astute enough to sort of notice these things. So.
Maybe. I'm sure if I saw a Cleeks, a capacious Cleeks bag in the wild, I would notice it. You can't fail to spot that quality of design.
They've had a brand relaunch, haven't they, recently? I saw some new clobber on the market.
Yeah, they made Richard Bland mean himself for more money. Yeah, they did. Lovely new logo. And look what he did for Martin Keimer's game, eh? Back to his best in time for the US Open. He does it every year.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe a dark horse this week. We will obviously get
surely his exemptions run out, Sam, and he's not playing.
I don't know. Actually, to be honest, I say that and I haven't
field.
He's not. Okay, good. Right.
Anyway,
what's your view on this, Ben? Actually, before we go any further, obviously with the Masters, you have a lifetime exemption. US PGA Championship, you have a lifetime exemption. If I'm not mistaken. Open Championship, you have a lifetime exemption.
I think it's up to 60.
Right.
I think the PGA might be as well. I think the Masters is like a lot of things. Like there are nice traditions, but anything that seeks to copy or emulate them never really works. And I'll be lying if I said I knew which came first, actually, between the Open and the Masters. But my view is certainly, and I did have this thought during the PGA, that with the greatest of respect to Sean McKeel and Rich Beam and stuff, I know some of them don't play anymore, but I just don't think they should. They don't add anything to the event. It's not the same as, I think you can make a pretty strong argument that the Masters shouldn't do it, but that's something we've grown up with and does feel somewhat part of the story, doesn't it? And it has given us things. I think it's given us things like, Bernard Langer, for instance, Fred Couples, we could go through all of them. the veterans who've shown that they can still compete around there using nous. But these other events, they move to different courses. So you're asking, Rich Beam to go and play Quail Hollow, where it's not part of his story. So maybe that's it. Maybe it should be, if it goes back to the course you won at, you can come along. But there are too many spots being wasted on players who have no chance.
Okay, well, I mean, this podcast escalated quite quickly into players shouldn't be playing certain events, but we'll go back. We'll go back to a review of last week's events, if that's okay, Ben, and we'll start with the DP World Tour, the KLM Open. Connor Syme was victorious, and I watched the back nine yesterday, and I've got to say, was extremely impressed by the way he closed it out. I mean, this is someone who has never won on the DP World Tour before. He won on the Challenge Tour, but quite a long time ago. But when you look at how well he played on Sunday, in the heat of contention, you kind of wonder how it's taken him so long.
Yeah. And he's always been a nice player, hasn't he? I think there are two things I would sort of point to. One is, and I can't get away from this, he practices with Ewan Ferguson, Richard Mansell, and Callum Hill. And were it not for Ewan Ferguson losing a playoff at the Soudal Open, all four of them could have won in the last 9 DP World Tour events. That is astonishing, and it proves, doesn't just highlight, it absolutely proves that these things can and do happen. It doesn't mean that whoever, Connor Syme's other mate is. By the way, I think Marco Penge occasionally gets involved, and he's won as well. But there's certainly the four of them have made content with the DP World Tour together. They practice together. How Richard Mansell got himself in among these three Scotsmen, I don't know, but he did, and it's it's definitely rubbed off. And hopefully we can have one of them on the pod. Maybe we'll speak to Richard. I'd love to speak to Richard at the British Masters or something like that. Maybe we can do that later in the year. But I'd love to hear more about how it works. But people like things they can measure in golf, and we can't measure this, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and we shouldn't try to consider it as part of our calculations, right? So that's the one thing. The other, as relates to his performance, and I was at a summer football tournament yesterday, knocked out by a long ball side, which was a shame. But
what were you playing, or you were in a coaching capacity?
Watching. No, right. I was in a parent's capacity, maybe a consulting occasionally with the leadership. No, under 9 summer football tournament, and it was great, but we did get knocked out by a long ball outfit, which is a shame. But the other is I didn't really keep a close eye on it. I was quite pleased with myself that I was lost in the football sufficiently to not be refreshing Joachim Lagergren's every shot, having been on him at a big price. But I do think the dynamic of how far those two had pulled clear probably has helped Syme in some way. I think, whether you want to use that phrase, I don't like the use of the phrase, it's match play. It's more that it was basically a head-to-head, right? The only way someone else could win is if they both played really badly. So having that one opponent against you, having him in the same group, I think that has to help. I don't know, and Lagergren, of course, hit it in the water on the third, having missed a good opportunity for birdie on the first. On Shot Tracker, now I did check this bit, it told me Syme had gone in the water as well and then changed its mind, which is annoying. But was he close to going in the water at the third? Or did you
I wasn't watching at that point. I wasn't watching at that point, but I will say I noticed a few Shot Tracker issues over the course of the tournament.
It was bad, yeah. But yeah, quite often we've all had it. I mean, I'm now like fluent in the language of the IEMG Shot Tracker. When there's like a lake or down the left hand side of a hole, and the line goes out towards the lake, but it stops just short and says, it's in the rough. Full well that ball is in the water. Like every time that you're going to be a penalty drop in 5 minutes when they've got to the ball and found that it did actually go in because someone's pressed a button because they've got to have a stab at it, and then they've walked over there and got, yeah, that is in the pond. Anyway, the reverse happened with Connor Syme. It did say he was in the water, then it changed the first cut of rough. Anyway, it was never that close, was it? Lagergren didn't get within 1, and although the margin was only 2 in the end, that's because he eagled the last, and Syme made the par that he knew would be more than enough. So really impressive, tidy player. He does everything well, nothing spectacularly, and well done to him.
Yeah. I know, and I think it's fair to say, Ben, hard lines on Lagergren, an excellent pick from yourself, and obviously he gave you a good run, and for a while it looked like it may well be his. But all the same, Very good call at a long price. What was he, 170 to 1 or something around?
Yeah, there was a bit of 200s. I recommended him at 190 to get a couple of extra places. I try with my staking plans on the website to give the reader the information that I think is best, and they can try and action quickly because prices are going to change, right? So had he won, I would have settled it 150, 175 to 1 or something. I'd have had to go back and check the general price at the time, but there was some 200s definitely. Yeah, he loves those conditions, and he loves to work the ball in the wind. Joachim.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask you about that, Ben, because I don't remember watching much of it last year. But was it particularly windy this year versus, the sort of normal? Obviously, it gets windy in Holland generally, but it seemed very, very windy this week. Was that out of the ordinary? Or?
Yeah, definitely different to last year. And actually, when you consider that they played, I don't know about Sunday, but they certainly played Lift Clean and Place on Saturday after they started really late because the course was flooded. The course could have been really brutal with that wind. If it had been firm and fast, with the rain they got. I think they had some rain on day one as well, didn't they? So, much windier than last year. And it's one of those courses, it is quite similar to Le Golf National, I think. I think that's a connection worth exploring every time we have both those events. But actually, as I think about it, there aren't that many renewals of the Open de France we've had where it's been really windy, and you can imagine how brutal Le Golf National would become under those conditions. And obviously, we last saw it in the Olympics. Well, we saw it after that, didn't we? But we saw it in the Olympics, and it was a bit sort of benign, and obviously the players were a lot better. But yeah, that course, the International, when it blows, if they don't get rain, it could easily be somewhere you could win in 2 or 3 under if it got really bad.
And how much do you think? I mean, I'm looking at the leaderboard now. Obviously, it's a comparatively weak event. You haven't got any sort of really big names, but is that sort of a useful pointer that we can kind of look at that leaderboard and say, okay, well, when we have windy conditions in the future, let's look at this because it struck me immediately. The thing that struck me was the fact that you had 3 Scotsmen, in the top. Well, was it the top? I'm looking at it now. The top 6. Obviously. Syme won, but then you got Ferguson and Ramsey both up there. That's got to be no coincidence, right? So for future iterations of this event, that's got to be a really strong thing to look at.
Totally, and with this particular course, I think it changes the dynamic of it completely. I think under benign conditions, that course is one where actually there are some quite wide fairways. It's not a links course in the traditional sense. But I know it became very clear very early on that this was going to be a strategic week, right? Richie Ramsey being the sort of archetypal strategic golfer on the DP World Tour these days. And the wind was really the reason for that. It changed a lot of you couldn't cut corners, you couldn't carry, you had to play for, there's a par 4 on the front line, maybe the 6, where a couple of players did try to drive it in the end, but essentially they were hitting 190-yard tee shots and leaving themselves full wedges. So yeah, I definitely would say so. With Lagergren in particular, I do think he's going to be 100 to 1 next time he plays rather than 200 to 1, right? But he's a player who, when he probably more for an in-play better really. I think after round 1, actually, for the price he was, quite often when you've tipped a player at 200s, it'd be well into the weekend before you really start to get excited or at least think, well, this at least he's going to play. So whatever. With Lagergren, I didn't really feel at any point like he wouldn't stick around because he does that. He's really good. When he's on, he's on. He's got a really long swing, and I imagine it gets out of rhythm sometimes, but he had it all week, and I can have no complaints of that tournament. He played great. He's beaten the rest by 4 or 5, so it's frustrating that Conor Syme couldn't have, withdrawn with a thumb injury or something. But obviously that's a very selfish thing to say, and he's a deserving winner. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, I think.
Yeah, well, let's move on to the Canadian Open, which I watched a decent amount of yesterday. Ryan Fox won in a playoff against Sam Burns. I know you had money on Sam Burns, so again hard lines on that, but great to see Fox win again. And I will say, this is not me kind of crowing about something, but a few weeks ago we talked about his win at Myrtle Beach, and I mentioned the fact that I could see that freeing him up, and he would, could well win again, or certainly play very well over the coming weeks, because the same thing had happened on the DP World Tour a couple of years ago. And, we've seen exactly that. And he actually referenced it in his press conference on Friday. And he says, and I've got the quote here, it says, he was asked basically on sort of the notion of being freed up. And he said, just everything doesn't seem to quite matter as much. So it's hard to kind of put your finger on what exactly. Obviously, I know I've been playing well. To win, you've got to play well. But it just feels like that 4 foot of a birdie doesn't matter as much if I make it or miss it. And I think that's a huge thing, isn't it? Especially, I suppose, when he's now playing on the PGA Tour, he's managed to lock up that that 2-year exemption, which is huge for any player, but especially for someone like that who hadn't really set up a home in the US. And obviously now he's just feeling in a completely different mindset, and he can sort of almost sort of freewheel it every week. And I think that's dangerous for a player like Fox. I mean, it's a dangerous thing, as in it's a good thing for him.
Yeah, well said. I agree with every single word of that. And I felt bad. Sam Burns didn't play very well in the playoff. And he's missed a 5-foot uphill putt, right edge uphill putt to win. He's the number one putter on the PGA Tour this year. He should have won the tournament, right?
Yeah.
Once the playoff begins, I mean, you could argue, he's 4 shots back going to the final round. He was like tied for 13th. Loads of players have got within 1 or even level and made a mess of things late on. So he would have been in some ways a fortuitous winner. And there's no doubt about it, Ryan Fox deserved it. But I felt bad for criticising Sam Burns in the way that I did. In the aftermath, that's the product of staying up for 3 hours waiting for that to unfold, and also having I've not had much luck this year. But anyway, that's me. That's by the by. With Ryan Fox, I mean, he's everyone who meets him tells you he's just as straightforward and generous and likable as they come. He plays the game faster than just about anybody. Like I'd say, if you ask me the 3 fastest golfers. Could do an office gag here, I won't. It would be Fox, Jones, Paratore. And that's to be admired. I mean, there was a great moment in the playoff where he'd played his 3rd shot. Sam Burns hadn't even got to his ball to play his 3rd shot. So yeah, he plays the game in the right way. He's a wonderfully natural golfer. He's also a late bloomer. He's, I know he's in some ways he's sort of predestined to be a great sportsman with his dad being an All Black, but and his physical talents are there for all to see, but it took him a long time. He won that Super 6 event, and you'd have people saying that doesn't really count, and it took him a long time. And now you look at his CV: Wentworth, Dunhill Links, and it could so easily have been more. I mean, let's not forget, this guy has been robbed of 2 tournaments on the DP World Tour. He lost the Irish Open to Russell Knox to back-to-back 40-foot putts, and he lost the KLM Open coincidentally to Victor Perez to some ridiculous putts as well. So he's paid his dues. He's getting paid out now, and he'll be on the next President's Cup team, I hope. I mean, there's some irony in the fact they've been woo-hawing all that when they left him out when he was like number 25 in the world, but hopefully he's on the next team, right?
Well, I hope so, and that was one of the things that I was thinking immediately. It's like, it almost feels like he's peaked at the wrong time. Hopefully he can continue the good form for the next year or so. But he definitely deserves to have at least one try at the President's Cup. He should have been in 2022 in my mind. There was a case for him last year as well, but definitely next year. If he just needs to keep playing well, doesn't he? He just can't afford to have a sort of mini slump like he had sort of before Myrtle Beach. But yeah, I would love to see him in the team, and I'm sure he would be a great player in that sort of match play setting as well.
Totally, and the golf course they're going to the next President's Cup is made for him as well. So when it comes down to it, really the key determinants are how players are performing at that moment in time. So anything that happens now, anything to do with the golf course suitability, they're second, third in the list of factors. He's going to have to keep playing to a high standard, but. To PGA Tour. We saw it with Sepp Straka actually a couple of years ago in the Ryder Cup. Obviously, he'd been second in the Open as well. But the John Deere Classic win, it's like all of a sudden you're talking about guys who are multiple PGA Tour winners. When you're Europe or the internationals, you haven't got that depth. Those are going to be very hard guys to leave out. We've got players like Christian Bezuidenhout, who's played the last couple, hasn't he? He's not won on the PGA Tour yet, and the internationals invariably are looking at players like that who don't win often or haven't won at all. Well, Ryan Fox can now say he's won, and not just the Myrtle Beach Classic, which sort of fell in his lap a little bit. Great shot to win it. He's won a Canadian Open. That's serious stuff. So yeah, onwards and upwards for him. And he'll be thinking, why not again this week? But also, the Open I think is the one that many of us would think he's got all the shots for that. We've seen it before, and he's riding the crest of a wave. It's Bob McIntyre a year on, isn't it? It's the same sort of thing is happening with Ryan Fox.
Well, this is an intriguing thing with Fox. Really, is you look at his major record. I had a look at it this morning. He's only had one top 20 in a major, which was the Open. I want to say something like 2018, 2019. I can't remember which year. But, he's played a lot of majors, but he just hasn't really, he hasn't really peaked at all in those events. Now, obviously, a big part of that is that he hasn't been playing in the US. 3 of the majors are in the US, so now he's getting the US experience under his belt. That may help him in weeks like this week. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure I can necessarily see him winning this week, but it wouldn't be the most ridiculous thing to happen. And certainly the right type of US course, especially I think if you get a sort of a faux links type setup, maybe where it's not got such penal rough, then I think he could, he could contend in a major.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I'd want to, something like Kiawah Island or whatever, without having the list of
yeah,
where they're going for the next 50 years in front of us. I think the big thing, like he's got kind of two main weaknesses, I would say. Number one is he's sort of wildly inaccurate off the tee. When he's on, he looks great, and he has weeks where the driver sings. But he does miss a lot of. He's a guy who, if he hits 30% of fairways in a week, you're not surprised. And the other is that he can look a bit ropey over short putts, and I would say those two things at Oakmont are quite difficult to overcome. So yeah, perhaps not this week, but he's good enough to go on and compete at the very highest level. And that I always sense, for someone who seems to have all the physical gifts you could possibly want, a sense that he's not always believed in himself. So he definitely will now.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to a few other things a few other events that took place last week. Firstly, the US Open qualifiers. Now, got to mention, Ben, that you were on Radio 5 Live last week talking about this. I thought you did a fantastic job, can I just say? You had some little insights that I don't think people would necessarily have known. I thought you felt very comfortable in the radio setting, and congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. I've been on Five Live now, never in my life until April, and now I've been on twice. And we're getting on the verge of a regular slot here, Sam. But it was nice to be asked on. I should be clear. They asked you, and you said let him go on. So thank you for that. I got to chat to Naga, and that was nice. She loves her golf. She did ask me one question which threw me when she said, "What about the postman?" And I thought, is there some sort of I missed a storyline here where a postman from Wisconsin has qualified for the US Open, but of course it was Ian Poulter and his son Luke Poulter, and his ultimately doomed bid to qualify. But yeah, it was good, and Sliced got a mention on national radio, so and numbers were good last week. I can see the relationship there between Naga and the extra 50 listeners we got. So yeah.
Well, with the postman thing, Ben, what you really should have done is, once you realised, the sort of the error, is you should have then doubled down and just said, "I don't think JT Poston's in the field this week."
Very, very good.
His nickname as well.
JT Poston's already qualified, Naga, and you should know that. That's a shame.
But anyway, I think there's some. I don't know if there's any particular qualifiers you wanted to talk about that you haven't already mentioned. Obviously, there's some reasonably high-profile qualifiers from Europe last week. Thibaut Olesen, Nicholas Norgard. Both. I think Olesen potentially could be a dark horse for this week. But anyone else you wanted to call out who qualified in the golf's longest day?
Not especially. Bud Corley, probably the one who I could see him playing well. We've mentioned him a few times the last few months. It's great that he's not just flirted with being towards the top of leaderboards again. He's sort of solidified, and he's back. It's almost like we've gone back in time. It's 2014 again, and we're waiting now for Bud Corley to go and win. And I hope he does it with what he's been through. Probably not going to be the US Open, but no, there were none really that stood out beyond that. There is the interesting story was the dentist who lives half an hour down the road, and it turns out I don't think he's a dentist. He's more of a consultant for dentists. There's some rumblings on the internet that all may not be as it seems there, but we'll see how he gets on. But yeah, it's a great. I love that Monday of US Open qualifying and just following
pretty good
things, seeing how they unfold. And we nearly had Cam Young last week. Nearly went from qualifying to winning. I think the last person to do that is still Harrison Fraser. I don't think anyone's done it since. I know Harrison Fraser qualified and then won at Southwind. I'm sure a few others have gone pretty close, but Cameron Young was very close to doing that.
He was very, very close, and I did kind of enjoy the sort of the emotional turmoil that you get with Cam Young. And I did actually, before the round started, yes, I didn't really have any money on anyone in the mix, so I thought actually this could be the right type of time for him to do something. So I did have a very small wager on him, and he gave me a good run. But yeah, I mean, the 17th hole, he sort of hacked it in the bushes off the tee, and you're sort of thinking, oh, he's gone. And then amazingly, he made a par there, so he still had a very good chance going out the last. All he needed was a birdie from the middle of the fairway on the last hole, the par 5, and he hit a shot which he still described. He said that he thought he hit a brilliant shot, and he thought he was going to have 12 feet for eagle. So anyone watching that shot on TV, they're just thinking he's absolutely pummeled that, and he hasn't factored in adrenaline or anything like that. And it's it may have felt like a good shot to him, but there are lots of ways to sort of define a good shot, and I don't think that will qualify in my book.
Well, yeah, I think I probably err on his side of that particular point, but I do think as well. Yeah, let's not forget he whiffed one into the bushes on 17 and got away with it. In effect, he made great par, but his ball should have been lost. Really, the only thing I'll say, it's easy now, isn't it? But to that pin, it's the most layup flag ever. I thought Nick Doherty did a really good job on the otherwise appalling television coverage, which we probably haven't got time to talk about at length, but TV coverage is really bad. But one of the things that was good was Nick Doherty's contribution, and he kept saying, "Look," and it's a great point he made about the margins of golf. Sometimes, if Cam Young had hit the fairway bunker off the tee, he might be a PGA Tour winner. So he hit a better shot. That's a great thing about golf. Very rarely in other sports, you hit a better shot and it ends up with a worse outcome because it's forced you to do something that actually probably, comes with higher risk and higher reward. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways you could say fair play to him for taking on the shot and trying to give himself a putt to actually win the tournament rather than just get into a playoff. So,
and he's a rubbish wedge player as well. So let's not forget that. And if he lays up, by the way, if he lays up and doesn't make a birdie, we're all leaping down his throat saying you've got a chance eagle to win a tournament and you're laying up from 250. So I sympathise with that, but it's another near miss for the man.
It is, unfortunately, another one for him. You mentioned the coverage, and there were some, definitely have some gripes with the coverage on the PGA Tour. But we had a message in from a listener, Andrew Summers, about the coverage on the DP World Tour and saying how good it is, how good the team is, sort of regular team they have with sort of Boxall and Spence and that. And to be fair, he's absolutely right. They're doing an exceptional job, and I think you're a lot more often you're kind of looking at the sort of the sort of PGA Tour coverage and thinking, this leaves a bit to be desired. But rarely we find ourselves thinking that with DP World Tour coverage. I don't know if you agree with that, Ben, but it's a good call out, I think.
Yeah, 100%. We all have our favourites and stuff. There'll be some commentators and pundits we don't particularly enjoy or whatever. But on the DP World Tour, I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's also sort of fits with the product, right? We don't need to pretend that this is something more than it is, right? This is what it is. This is how we're going to cover it. We're going to cover it with a load of people who live this life. And have become very skilled broadcasters. And I'm going to give a particular word for Mark Rowe, because I like to laugh at Mark Rowe because he says some ridiculous things and he's a zany character. But he seems like a genuinely nice man who, sometimes says things that have you thinking, well, come on, Mark, that's a bit silly. But I think he's so good on that DP World Tour coverage. And I love the fact that occasionally he'll go, well, that was just awful. And he's not like, oh, well, that's a strange decision or whatever. He's like, that is just a terrible shot. And I like that about him. And you can do that when you've got people like Mark Rowe, Richard Boxall, Jamie Spence. They were very, very good players. Like these are like in the top 1% of players from the UK of the history of golf, right? So let's not forget how good they all were, but they weren't world-class players. And they're commenting on players with similar skills, like they know what they're thinking and how they're feeling in those moments. They know how big it is for someone like Connor Syme. That's great. It really, really works. I think in terms of sports broadcasting, Sky Sports do so much so well. Like I love the cricket in particular. I think they've nailed the darts. Generally speaking, Sky Sports is amazing, and I don't want to ever give the impression that I don't understand that fact and how lucky we are in this day and age to be able to choose between 4 golf tournaments last week: Tenerife, the LPGA, and the 2 main men's tour events. But that PGA Tour product on a normal week is rubbish. It needs to improve. It's the worst thing Sky Sports do.
Well, I will wrap us up quickly with the other events, and then we'll move on to US Open because we've got quite a lot to talk about. So, just the other events to talk about: Hotel Planet Tour was the Swiss Challenge, which was in fact in Switzerland. Turns out, Ben.
Sorry about that. And sign up to the newsletter, and I'll correct all the mistakes I make in the podcast. What more could you ask for?
There you go, and a good shout out for the newsletter. Yes, please do sign up. Anyway, Felix Maury, Frenchman. We've talked a lot about young Frenchmen, and he won in a playoff over Santiago Tarrio, who you may remember from DP World Tour. Felix Maury feels like another one of those, promising young players who could, could make a decent career for themselves.
Yeah, he's decent. I think there's probably a ceiling on him that isn't there with a few of them. But he's got lovely hair and he doesn't wear a hat, so I admire that.
You're right. There's not many. I was thinking, is he the sort of European Schneiderjans, possibly?
Yeah, somewhat with a bit more of a sort of. It needs more frizzies than Pantene.
Very good. Corn Ferry Tour. It was the BMW Charity Pro-Am, and Austin Smotherman won. I think it's 5 years since his previous win, also on the Corn Ferry Tour.
Bryson's
the
mate,
LPG.
is it? Sorry, Sam. Bryson's mate. He's friends with Bryson. They went to college.
Oh, is he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he does hit the ball really well. He's one of those who you think if he ever really became a slightly above average chipper and putter, like he'd have a good PGA Tour career. So he'll probably have another chance to prove that next year, won't he?
He could well be one of these players who sort of bounces up and down between PGA Tour and Corn Ferry Tour, a sort of a new Michael Putnam, if you will. The LPGA Tour, it was a ShotRite LPGA Classic. Jennifer Kupcho won that one. Am I correct in saying that Jennifer Kupcho is married to someone called Jay Monahan, but it's not the Jay Monahan?
That's great trivia. I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah,
I'm pretty sure
let's go with it. Yeah, she's married to Jay Monahan.
But it's not the Jay Monahan. It's
just
someone who's named.
It could be his son. They do a lot of that.
Jay Monahan II.
Yeah,
maybe.
Jay Monahan too. There's a good highest bidder. Name as many 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s as you can. Very good, that, yeah.
Well, you see, this actually nearly caught me out. Well, it did catch me out the other day when I was looking through the golf's longest day and the US Open qualifiers, and I saw Tom Lehman in a leaderboard, and he was right on the fringe of contention. And I tweeted about it. So I said, this is incredible. Like 66-year-old Tom Lehman in the mix, and it was pointed out to me that it was actually his son. And I thought, why is he not there down as Thomas Lehman Jr.? I mean, you can't just put Thomas Lehman and expect people to know that it's his son.
I am with you. What we need is more Chris DeMarcos in this world who name their sons Christian or whatever. And by the way, here's another name base. This is the most sliced thing ever, if I can say that 6 months into our podcast. We're about half an hour into this US Open special, and we have not talked about the US Open yet. But one final thing before the footnote of the US Open is that it dawned on me last week that there are two players with the surname Olesen on the DP World Tour, and they're both called Jacob. Because I think someone mentioned in coverage that Thorbjorn's real first name is Jacob. So we've got two Jacob Olesens
really?
on there. Yeah, he's
never
Jacob.
knew that. I never knew that was his real name.
Presumably his dad's called Thor or something. I don't know. Anyway, but he's Jacob. So we've got two Jacob Olesens.
Well, I've learned something today, Ben. Thank you for that. Right, very, very quickly now. Ladies European Tour, it was the Tenerife Women's Open. Sarah Kuskova won. And Live Golf, it was Virginia. And Joaquin Niemann won for the 6th time this year, which must be his...
Right, that sounds like too many, but he's won a lot.
Is that too many?
I think he's won 4 this year and 6 overall or something.
Six overall, sorry, not 6 this year. Sorry,
Yeah.
Apologies, I've not been paying enough attention. And
No, you've been paying exactly the right amount of attention. Carry on.
But anyway, he's making, he's doing serious things on the Live Tour, and I know you've mentioned the fact that you think that the majors this year, a couple of the majors might suit him. I'm assuming that one of those that you were referring to was Oakmont. So
I said on this podcast he'd play well in the PGA and Oakmont, and things so far have gone to plan because he finished 8th in the PGA, and now it's Oakmont.
Yep. Okay, right. So this takes us nicely on to our US Open preview. Thank you if you stuck with us through about half an hour of non-US Open talk. But firstly, wanted to ask you, Ben, this is something we talked about. What is your favourite US Open to date that you have watched?
2015 Chambers Bay, as I reflect upon it. I don't know how much I enjoyed it at the time, and I think I really enjoyed watching Matt Fitzpatrick win his US Open. I enjoyed watching McIlroy win because that was like the birth of a superstar, and because I had a morning starter who played terribly, and because I was young and reckless, I backed McIlroy just before he teed off that week, and he won by like 30 shots. That was great. There've been loads I enjoyed. I really didn't enjoy Olympic Club, finished in the middle of the night. I was on someone who nearly won, Jim Furyk, I want to say. But yeah, the one I really, really look back on fondest is Chambers Bay. You've got a polarizing golf course. You've got a completely out of his mind rant from Gary Player, who called the course designer senile and said he must have one leg short than the other. Just a great piece of content. I wish we could relive that moment. And you've got we all remember DJ 3 putting and Spieth winning, but there was more. There's Brandon Grace shanking one onto a railway, basically.
That's what I remember.
Didn't Spieth make a double on the par 3 I think he made a double on like
Possibly,
16th
yeah.
and then bounced back. It was the first time we'd seen Cam Smith at an international level. Louis Oosthuizen played so great in that final round. It's just a great US Open on a fascinating golf course, and Jason Day got vertigo. So that obviously not something to be joked about necessarily, but it's been 10 years. I think we're safe. So that was my favourite US Open certainly of the last 15 years. What about you? Can I just say, Sam?
Yeah.
I knew what you were going to choose here. I just want to say up front, I'm not saying I'm sure you could have guessed mine. It's not criticism, but I knew, and I'm just giving you the listeners this time to think, what do we know about Sam and what is he going to choose? And the answer is
2015. Sorry, not 2015. That's yours. 2013. Justin Rose winning at Merion. Definitely the one for me. I mean, to be honest, there've been some great ones. I really enjoyed Matt Fitzpatrick's win. That one in very recent memory really sticks with me. But at the time, certainly Justin Rose. I mean, it just felt like to have obviously like an English winner winning that event was a big thing. I mean, from a kind of selfish perspective, that week I had money on Mickelson and Rose, and they finished. They finished 1-2. Mickelson had the lead going into the final round. And I watched some of the highlights over the weekend, so I wanted to sort of relive it a bit. And what I completely forgotten about was that Mickelson basically didn't make a putt the entire day on Sunday. I mean, he actually played all right, but he just could not get the ball in the hole. And it was one of those where we've often talked about it, Ben, haven't we? That when you win events, you're often relying on a bit of luck, and a lot of the time that luck is your closest competitors essentially failing, and this is exactly what happened there. And it's funny because I look at the leaderboard going into the final round, and alongside Rose, I think he started maybe 3 shots back in a tie for 5th, I want to say. Alongside him was Luke Donald, and you sort of think, well, they could have been his day. There's no reason why it couldn't have been his day. I think he shot something like a 75 or 76 in the end, but you sort of forget about the players who were there kind of in the hunt, who then ultimately didn't do that. And you obviously when look back at Luke Donald, and he never won a major, but he was in that same position where he could have made a charge, similar sort of age to Rose. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And the other notable thing was a few days after that US Open, my daughter was born, my first child.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
And her middle name,
Marion.
Marion. No, it's Rose. That's her middle name. And there was a nod to that. I mean, my wife would probably kill me fortunately she doesn't listen to this podcast, but I'm sure if she realised there was a golf reference in our daughter's middle name, she would not be happy. But it's also my mum's middle name, so there was a second reason I could at least pretend that was the real reason.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. That's lovely. Well, actually, it's funny because I remember exactly where I was when I was on the first sort of overseas holiday with my now wife. We were on Santorini for that week, so I do remember. I managed to find a television which was good, and she didn't fly home in disgust. So I knew, therefore, I was in good hands. But yeah, one of the other things, like all these small macro events that all combine. I'm sure I'm not. We should have done some research, shouldn't we? But we're both busy. But I'm sure that week didn't Justin Rose go home. Home being like the Bahamas or Florida or something, and he came in late, I think, and everyone had been practicing on the Monday or something, and then there'd just been loads of rain, and it just changed the course, and a lot of people struggled to adjust to the green speed. I feel like Justin Rose came in late and didn't have that problem,
Yeah, quite possibly. I'd forgotten that, but you may well be right. Yeah.
And in terms of a bit of synergy for you, just to round off this thought as it evolves in my head, is very close friends with fellow Bahamas exile Adam Scott, Justin Rose. And obviously we talked at the start of this podcast about friends and practice partners inspiring each other to achieve things. That definitely happened with those two. They've spoken about it. And Adam Scott's Masters win also dramatically affected by a downpour. The greens were much slower that Sunday, and it probably just helped Adam Scott with his broom handle. Yeah, there you go. Who knows?
I like it. I like it. Yeah. To be honest, I'd forgotten that they are close, aren't they, Rose and Scott? I mean, you sort of forget these things, but they're not in the sort of tight knit environment that you are on the DP World Tour. You sort of see these players, practicing together all the time. But Right, the next thing to talk about, Ben. So Oakmont this week, it's well known for being probably the hardest course on the US Open rotor. Extremely tough. It sounds like it's probably going to be even tougher this year. They certainly lengthened the course. They've made several other changes. Gil Hans has made some renovations, hasn't he? How do you personally rate Oakmont versus other US Open courses that we see on the rotation?
I would say right towards the top, actually, and that's because the US Open has become something a bit different over the last few years. They've experimented. We've talked about Chambers Bay. We've been to Erin Hills. We've been to LA Country Club, and I'm all for that. Pinehurst we've had twice in the last 11 years, or whatever. Very different style of golf course. Obviously has the history as well. But there are some places that are just they go hand in hand with the US Open. Really, if you were to say what is the US Open, you pretty much draw up Oakmont. So I wouldn't want it every week. I wouldn't want it every year. But it's been 9 years since we were last here. It was a fantastic renewal in 2016. There's another one that, apart from the rain delays and stuff, you could easily have that towards the top of any recent ranking. Angel Cabrera's win as well, towards the back end of the previous decade was a really engrossing tournament to watch. So I love it. I can't wait to see it again. It's going to be really hard. The only shame is that it's raining there. And I actually think had it not rained and it's rained a lot in the spring, the grounds team have talked about that as well. I think had you genuinely got this place firm, it would actually be that perfect blend where you're not the US Open since DJ won here, somewhat ironically, because I actually think Oakmont is not as straightforward. It's harder to pigeonhole than some of them. But since he won it, 2 for Bryson, Woodland, 2 for Koepka, Wyndham Clark. Matt Fitzpatrick's the outlier. I mean, he was like thrashing it miles the week that he won. Basically, you've had to hit the ball a long way, and I think Oakmont firm would not necessitate that. The rain that's arrived on Monday and is going to fall on Tuesday and possibly Wednesday as well probably means we are back to looking at a super long winner of this tournament again. That's a bit of a shame, but yeah, I can't wait.
I think they're gonna. Yeah, well, we will see what the weather holds, but I feel like they're going to be able to get it firm pretty quickly. I mean, obviously not as firm as it would be had there not been rain at the beginning of the week, but certainly by the weekend, I reckon it's going to be really firm.
I hope so, because do you remember Cabrera's? It was like Carnoustie style.
Yeah.
It was almost yellow, which you would then be talking like 5 over could win this thing. What was DJ? Yeah. Maybe 4 under or something like that. I'd have to remind myself.
Well, I think he was 5 under. I want to say, but I could be wrong. But yeah, you're right though. I mean, it will change the dynamic of the tournament, and I was going to ask about that because, in terms of what will it take to win this week? Because I look at the leaderboard, last time when it was here when DJ won, the thing that jumps out to me from that leaderboard is total driving, which is sort of, it seems like almost a bit of a cop out in many ways, but you got Dustin Johnson was obviously the longest. He was hitting the ball the furthest out of anyone, but he was 18th in driving accuracy here, so he was hitting plenty of fairways. It's not like he was lashing around all over the place. Other people who are prominent on the leaderboard, you got Shane Lowry. He was, this is total driving up until the point of the tournament. Shane Lowry was 12th, Garcia was 9th, Piercy 30th, Andrew Landry, who was the 54-hole leader, was 5th. Sorry, Lowry is a 54-hole leader, but Landry was right up there. So
he was 36th, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So these are very good drivers of the ball, but not all of them are long. Certainly Shane Lowry, but is a reasonable. He's not he's not a short hitter, but yeah, and some of the other players that you look at on the leaderboard back then, Jim Furyk was right up there, Zach Johnson was there, Kevin Na was up there. These are people who hit more fairways than they do 300 plus yard drives. So what do you think,
Sam? It's as if you have read my yet to be published preview. I think you've hit upon my angle here for the tournament. I think I think this is a golf course where you have to drive the ball well, and I don't think that's necessarily been the case. Look, last year Bryson beat Rory. They're the 2 best drivers of golf ball in the sport. So clearly, one way or another, that will have been to their enormous advantage during Pinehurst. Matt Fitzpatrick was driving the ball great. Wyndham Clark's long, but Wyndham Clark's probably a good example. This is a very different challenge to LACC, and I think anyone who's extremely wayward has got next to no chance. And for me, it's the big conundrum about Bryson this week. Now, Bryson is exceptionally accurate for the distance he hits the ball. It's ridiculous how accurate he is. That's why he gains 2 strokes around on a normal week. It's ridiculous how good he is at driving the ball. But he hit 40-something% of fairways last week in Virginia. If he does that here, well, let's just say if he's 40th as he was there in driving accuracy, I think that's too much to overcome. And a lot of people will say, well, winged foot. And I think this is where it's different. I think winged foot was very clearly a place you can bomb and gouge. I don't think you can bomb and gouge Oakmont. I think if you can drive the ball like DJ, of course, as you've referenced, above average accuracy together with that power, that's probably what we'll get. So someone like Ludwig, someone like Joaquin Niemann, these people who drive the ball phenomenally well, that for me is the formula to find the winner of this tournament. The thing I'm still struggling with is, do we still consider the people who rank high in total driving because they're super accurate? And
yes, that's the question, and that's where
it's hard.
That's where there's a nuance in the total driving. It's important to look at when you're looking at the total driving stats. I think is to look at, obviously, when you look at it on at least on a desktop computer, you see their driving distance rank and their driving accuracy rank next to each other. And in my mind, you want to kind of skew it slightly towards the accuracy, but not fully. So you want to ignore someone, in my opinion, like, let's say Corey Connors, for example. Not completely ignore him. Maybe he'll finish top 20. He may well do. I don't see him winning the event because I don't think he hits it quite far enough. But then you look at someone like, someone who I think, could be a dark horse. I'm not saying they're going to win, but someone like JJ Spawn, who was sort of like around about 70th, 60th in both. I think that's sort of, you're maybe more likely to do well. But it's very hard. It's a real nuanced thing, and ultimately it's gonna come down to how they drive it on the week. It's all very well looking at their stats, and that's you'll get someone who hits it very far who will have a freak accuracy week. So
yeah, I think for me, I would be erring towards people who are consistently driving the ball well in strokes gained terms, but are not wild. I think that's the difference. Is someone like Minwoo Lee, who at the right golf course, he can hit 30-40% of fairways and gain a stroke around, and it looks good on paper, but then you take that to a different golf course and it's just not going to work the same way. He'd be the best example for me of like a player that I just could not consider here. And I think it's a worry for Bryson. I think Bryson's ridiculously short for this, I have to say. It's a worry and I thought he was the same at the USPGA, and obviously he was a contender there. He's brilliant, Bryson. He may well contend again, but I think he'll probably hit one too many drive into some places that are hard to recover from. I think it's a concern for him. I think it's a concern for Justin Thomas as well, because he can be both. Well, he's errant off the tee at times, and he's not even that long. Like, he's not super long. So I'd be looking more, like I said, like an Aberg, someone like Patrick Cantlay is driving the ball well. Scottie Scheffler is like the prime. He's so made for this, isn't he? So he's also 11-4.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Scheffler. I mean, I wanted to ask about a few players. I don't think we're going to have the time, unfortunately. But Scheffler particularly, I do want to talk about, because he's very short in the betting. I was talking about this on Twitter the other day, and I think, depending on whose account you believe, we're probably looking back to either 2009 Tiger or maybe even slightly before that for someone who's gone off that short for a major championship. So, this is extremely short. However, what I will say is if you want someone who drives the ball consistently, long and accurate, that is basically Scottie Scheffler. You've also got someone who we've talked about many times. His short game is unreal, and people are going to be missing greens. You will miss greens in the US Open. He will get up and down more than anyone else in the field. His approach play, he has got the right attitude in terms of conservative landing spots, but his distance control is unmatched. So he will put the ball the right side of the pin every time. Or if he doesn't, he'll get up and down. So I think he is going to be extremely hard to beat. But there is, of course, that thing with US Open. This word that we're always talking about, variance, right? Things can happen. You could have a couple of balls that you just slightly, don't completely flush, and they go into this 5-inch rough, and then you might make a couple of double bogeys. So it's how he responds to that, and he's generally pretty good at responding to that sort of adversity. But yeah, give me your take, Ben.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair. I mean, the thick rough. I'm just thinking about Ludwig last week. He hit it into some thick rough to the left of the par 3, the 11th, just as he was getting into the tournament, and it took him 4 hacks to get out of there. And that's the sort of thing that could happen here. And I don't care who you are. If you happen to get the worst lie of the week, it could cost you the tournament. And the other thing I would say on that, because it's getting a bit boring me telling you why Scheffler might not win. Obviously, any golfer ever, pretty much before a 4-day tournament of 72 holes, is more likely not to win than to win. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, they won't win, right? But with Scheffler, who may well win and is very much the most likely winner, I would just go back to 2016. I know DJ won it. So we got an elite winner. I think he was about 16-1. If you go like the top 40, I think there were 4 members of the world top 10. And I know the top 10 back then, you've got generally less reliable players and things have changed. I just wonder, you look at US Open subsequently, generally, although there's always a mix in the US Open, like we've had some like very, 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 last year being the best example, like 2 of the best 3 players on the planet finished first and second. Patrick Cantlay was the one who made them think, and he was a top 10 player. So, Matt Fitzpatrick, Zalatoris, and Scheffler at Brookline, like 2 of them had been in the mix for the PGA, and the other one was the best golfer in the world. The US Open is so often pretty obvious, but this one wasn't in 2016. We had Landry leading after 36 holes. Nobody knew who he was. Shane Lowry was even 100 odd to 1. So I think the course might just be a big enough concern to at least look elsewhere, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to move us on to our fancy picks, Ben, to our rapidly running out of time. We'll say very quickly, Lewis Blaine is leading again. Garvin Howarth is second. Right, Ben, I want to hear your 6 players. I know it's slightly different because obviously, they're in a normal week, because obviously we've got, you've got players like Scheffler who you're going to want to use in these type of events, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think on the DP World Tour game, if they're not members, you can only use them 3 times. That seems to be the thing.
I think you're right.
So I'm going to use Scheffler for the 3rd time. It's now or the Open. So yeah, Scheffler, Orberg, Rahm, Neiman, Lowry, Cantlay. Dull as dishwater, Sam. But I must have done all right last week because I definitely had Lagergren if I remember to click save. So they're my 6. I'm going to captain Ludwig, supreme driver of the golf ball, hinting that he's got his long game back. So yeah.
Okay, nice. Well, Scheffler is an auto pick for me in this type of event. Schauffele, I'm putting in there. Still not maybe firing quite on all cylinders, but at some point he will be, and this is perfect. He loves the US Open, so no reason why he can't. Cantlay is my biggest bet for the week. I think in terms of those driving stats we've talked about, he's ticking all the boxes. His game is trending in the right direction lately. He's been playing well, and he's one of those players. I think if Cantlay won a major, no one's going to be surprised by that, right? I'd be surprised if he ends his career without a major. I would go as far as saying he's one of those players you just sort of think just sounds right. Patrick Cantlay, 1-time major winner. So, and I think this could be the one. Sepp Straka, I backed anti-post a couple of weeks ago. His price has come in considerably since then, but I do think that he's ready for that step up to a major. Slight question mark as to whether he's long enough. That would be the only slight thing that would put me off him. But and then Shane Lowry, just because he obviously plays so well here. I was actually on him at 150-1 in 2016, so it was a tough finish. But it did prove that he likes the course, and obviously he's been playing extremely well this season. He's a better player than he was back then. So and then lastly, very good of yours, Ben Harris English. Great driver of the ball. So yeah.
Yeah, he's really become a great driver of the ball. He didn't used to be, but this year he's driven it as well as ever. And I can't stress enough how well he played at the PGA. Like Scheffler was unbeatable, so he's finished in the best possible position, really. But he could easily have been like solo second and clear of 3rd. He was excellent that week. He had 2 really silly holes, and the rest was great. So yeah. I think a lot of people have cottoned on to Harris English. He's a considerably shorter price now than he was for the PGA, but he keeps turning up in these US majors and playing well, so why not?
He does. He's got a very, very, very solid record in the majors generally, and particularly US Open. So yeah. Right, Ben, highest bidder. We have been sent a US Open special. So this is from Oliver Inwards. So we've got a choice of an easier one or a tougher one.
Well, I'll let you choose, Sam.
I'll go for the tough one. How many from the top 10 of the 2007 US Open can you name?
Oh no, that's too hard.
I'm going to need the venue. Should we go for the easy one?
Well, it'd be Oakmont. Surely it's the Oakmont US Open. I'd have thought it's Angels win, isn't it?
Was that? Yeah, of course. Yeah, that was 2007, wasn't it? In my head, it was.
I could tell you two. I could do two if you like. What's the other one? Come on.
The other one is how many of the top 10 from the 2016 US Open can you name?
Well, we talked about a lot of them.
We have talked about a lot.
Quite a lot, I would say. I'll say 7 and take my chances. Do you want to go 8?
I'll go 8, just because I need some points. I need the chance to get some points. Right. Dustin Johnson. He was definitely 1. Shane Lowry finished, I think, tied second, or certainly thereabouts. Did Andrew Landry hold on? I don't think Andrew Landry held on, to be honest, for a top 10.
Well done. He finished about 16th.
Yeah. Which ones have we talked about? So, Kevin Na. I'm pretty sure.
I think you might have said earlier that he was like 12th, but okay, we'll only check at the end. So
okay, fine.
You can name 9 because you get a mulligan, right? So you got 3 so far.
Right. Zach Johnson.
He definitely was. He was 8th, I think.
Yeah. What are the other ones that we mentioned earlier on? We did talk about a couple, haven't we?
Think about chemtrails and a global cabal of money hawking, powerful elite. You need to drain the swamp, Sam, to remember this one. Hiya.
What? What are you talking about?
Hiya. Hashtag hiya. Come on.
Oh, Scott Piercy.
Thank you.
The king of the Q&A.
QAnon. What?
No, he used to do the Q&As on Twitter. Do you remember? There's a really banal sort of Q&A. What's your favourite club in the bag?
Don't have one. Like generally, one of the most charismatic individuals.
I don't have one. Right. How many have I got, Ben?
You've got 5 if we count Kevin Na, and given that the clock's ticking, I'm just going to say yes to Kevin Na.
Have I said Jim Furyk?
No, 6. Well done.
Okay. God, I'm still too shy, Ben. This is supposed to be better than this. I've done extensive research into the 2016 US Open as well, so I've got no excuses. Okay, I'm gonna have to let you.
No, come on. Earlier, you told me about another person who was in the top total driving stats, and he's been a great driver of the golf ball ever since he first contended for a major in the year 1999, and jumped to see whether he could see his ball nearly getting to the green. I think I was 99. Fireball.
You got me wondering now. Oh, Garcia.
Yeah, very good. Right, so we need. I think that's you need one more. I'm going to give you clues.
7, isn't it?
Right, we've got a minute until our file size becomes too large. Okay, right. You've done well here, and Kevin Na is correct. So you only need one more. So I've got someone whose nephew beat him in a US Open qualifier last week.
Wait, hold it. I think I've got it. I think I've got one. Not the one you're talking about, but I'm pretty sure Jason Day was there.
Correct. Well done. After an opening 76, he shot 69, 66, 71 to finish 8th.
Yes. I mean, I needed some hints along the way, Ben, but I'm going to gratefully take my 5 points.
No, the only ones you didn't get were Jason Duffner, another solid driver of the ball, Daniel Summerhays, and Brandon Grace. Quite a lot of players there. Certainly Grace Johnson Day, who played really well in the previous year's US Open. That, again, is another. So there's probably a tick for Cantlay, and it's often a thing. But, we were talking about these great drivers. Just to round off one more, David Lingworth in 12th. Again, accurate, good driver. Yeah. So, yeah. Brendan
I really hope that we get... Yeah. I just hope we get that type of leaderboard this week. I really do. I want to see some short, accurate players up there. There's not many left. We talked about this with Roberto Castro, but I want to see a Brian Campbell type up there. That's what I want.
Fingers crossed.
But yes, we are very rapidly running out of time. Thank you very much for joining us for our US Open special, which turned out to be less special than it was still special, but we didn't talk that much US Open as it happened. But thank you for sticking with us, and we'll be back next week.